grow up with the NES, PlayStation, Star Wars, cartoons, and 80s TV? Do you like to think who would win in a fight between Batman and the Master Chief? Comics, games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of geeks. Games, movies, music, and TV, they're gonna tell you everything you need. Superheroes or not, they got your back. They're gonna save the world of This Week in Geek. This Week in Geek.
Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another Loose Cannon. I am Alex, and we are here with my co-host, who's probably going to be doing a few more of these with me, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron Pollyea.
All righty. So, what have you been up to recently when it comes to watching old films?
Well, most of my old films have been from the 1950s and 60s.
Okay.
Watching old sci-fi B movies.
Yes, this is just a subtle plug for the other podcast that we have going on here.
Earth versus Soup. I do it with my wife.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's been a good mix of things that I've kind of found myself watching. I've been shocked at finding certain films that are not in my collection that I've been having to purchase.
Well, are you going, like, when you get them, do you go through, when it comes to the kind of, or are you looking for, like, the older, like, pre-60s, right, or pre-70s?
Pre-70s. I generally will be doing 50s and 60s. I think there's a couple movies that are, like, very early 70s that we might cover.
So, like, if they were maybe originally they filmed them in the late 50s or 60s, but they didn't get released till the early 70s or something?
They didn't get released, or at least in the case of Soviet films, sometimes the movies still have the stylistic qualities of things from the 60s when it's inside the 70s. But yeah, some movies that were like lost. One of the movies that we watched was a Ed Wood movie that was completely lost and wasn't released until the 1990s for the first time. But obviously it was filmed in like 1952.
So basically, if they rolled film before the 70s, for the most part, that's fair game.
Yes, and then there's certain notable exceptions that will fall outside of that. But yeah.
Okay, well, when you pick them up, a lot of those, I know it's mostly been Westerns, but there's a lot of sci-fi and other things that are being put out on those manufacturer on demand from like Fox Studios. Like, they put them out, you can buy them from like the Studio Classics collections and things like that. Mm-hmm. Is that where you're finding a lot of them, or?
Believe it or not, no. The majority that we've been finding either have had releases on DVD or Blu-ray.
Okay.
Or they're in these giant 50 movies for $10 kind of sets.
Yeah, so then it's a crapshoot of what the quality is going to be if it's a public domain copy.
Yes, absolutely. And then our third place to look is Amazon Prime, just to watch it on demand video.
I was going to say, I looked, and Netflix and other ones, they seem to have a lot of names, but a lot of these are popping up on Amazon, and occasionally Tubi TV will have stuff. Now, they have a lot of unique items too, like TV shows, but they have a lot of weird sci-fi things. And the only thing you have to contend with is it's a free service, so every 15-20 minutes you get a commercial break.
Yes.
But, there's a lot of places popping up where they're just scrambling for content. So some of these weird and obscure movies are not as weird and obscure anymore.
Yeah, we haven't had a hard time finding most films that we've tried to find. There are, again, exceptions to the rule. Like, there's movies that we were like, we want to watch this next, and it's nowhere to be found. DVD, Blu-ray, Amazon Prime, Tubi, whatever.
And if you're lucky, there's a copy that somebody taped on VHS they put on YouTube.
Yeah, one of the films that we watched was a Soviet film, and the first thing that the first place that we did find it was actually on YouTube, that somebody had just bootlegged a VHS copy way back in the day, or a Betamax.
The question
copy.
is it a bootleg anymore if there's no copyright on it?
Well,
it's considered a lost film.
Here's the thing: we ended up finding a Blu-ray of it later on. Like it was really strange. I guess somebody had just decided to put it up for sale on Amazon, and it was an import from Russia. And it works, and it's gorgeous compared to the version that we watched.
So they were smart. They made it region free, but technically we're only selling it within Russia. So that way they wouldn't have to pay levies. I've seen that happen many times. And I guess that's a way of skirting around. Can you imagine how insane the bureaucracy is around some of the copyright laws of things that were produced during the Soviet Union?
I can't even imagine. I some of these I have to assume there's just no rights. That it was up to the state, like it was owned by the state for some reason.
Owned by the state, or there was like somebody had an investment in it, but then that person is no longer existing, and who knows if like the rights are buried somewhere, and they're just afraid to bring it up because somebody's going to get into a legal battle over it. They just don't want to bother.
Yeah, or just nobody has ever said anything about it, so why worry about putting it out?
Yeah,
I mean, there's some movies that we've gotten a hold of from the old Soviet times that I can guarantee that they're just bootlegged from an original.
Some cinema house found a copy of a 35 millimeter. Not a negative. They found a copy and then they just put it through a telecine machine and then made some money off of it.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just nobody left to raise a fuss about it.
Which is how I believe it's called I think it's the Star Wars 77 project and some of the other ones where they've gone because Lucasfilm said for years that they didn't have copies of the original Star Wars movies at all, and they were destroyed and all. Yes, there's got to be copies somewhere, right? Well,
yeah.
In like Argentina or something, they found a internegative of half of the movie, meaning I guess the copy they would have been given when they were going to be dubbing over the voices in the studio. And then the rest, they found a full, intact, preserved 35 millimeter. I think it was a second or third generation. They were able to figure out copy of the film, splice those together, and have been, as a fan service, painstakingly touching up every scene. And we're not talking like digital noise reduction. They're leaving the film grain intact, but they're color correcting every single scene so that it all matches. We don't get any flickering effects. Color matching. Redoing the color space so that it works on high def TVs and HDR and all this stuff. It's all this stuff that Lucasfilm has said either couldn't be done or would be too costly. And in like 3 years, fans have done it to a better and more precise result than what the actual studio would have done. And it's got to be killing and kicking. Like Disney knows it exists, and they're shared through like torrent sites, but not the way you'd normally think. They're not being shared through like illegal sites. They're being shared through film archival sites. So they're considering it a protected archival work because and the reason that Disney's probably kicking themselves is them declaring publicly that there is no way to restore it because the films were lost means that people can do whatever they want if they find it. Not that they can't sell it, obviously. They can't make money off of it.
Profit making.
But if they're releasing it just for historical purposes, and I've gone and like they're like 75 gigabyte downloads.
Wow.
Because it's 4K, full remastered, and I watched it, downloaded it, found a way to play it on my computer. I had to use a solid state drive because the amount of data it's reading at once, it's like reading a 4K Blu-ray disc. And in watching it, I was like, holy crap, it looks so much better than the actual official releases they've done. And it's like, at this point, they should just co-sponsor it and get a copy out. But it's projects like this that are interesting because in the Russia ones, they're probably, like you said, the rights are probably gone. So anybody who grabs a hold of it pays a little bit of money to have it cleaned up, removes any dirt and debris, they can release it probably. And then it's a case of, if somebody else tries to release a copy, then they can go, well, we released the copy first. So it might be a first come, first serve copyright situation.
Maybe. And I don't think that any of these things have been lost by any means.
There's probably in some Russian oligarch's archive somewhere.
I mean, we've come across a couple times when we've actually tried to look for like a historical piece over there that's supposed to be in a museum. Hey, is it possible to get a photograph of this? And, the general first response is always, no, this is not possible. And then you have to work through that. But, you know, we were looking for a battle flag for a specific division at one point. You know, can we get pictures of it? And no one knows where it is. This is not possible. And then they say, okay, well, we did find where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in this drawer, but it's not there. Okay, what's going on? And then they end up finding it like in some warehouse outside of Moscow.
That somehow is tangentially connected to Putin.
I mean, I assume that the area around Moscow is littered with warehouses that look like the one from, you know, Indiana Jones. Okay. It's just filled with things because, anyway, that's where inevitably anything that I'm looking over there for ends up being in a warehouse outside of Moscow that no one knew how it got there.
And there's some like old security guard that's been working there for 50 years and has no idea what's even there.
Yeah, no. Oh, of course not. Unless it's actually all captured German weapons from World War II. Then they know exactly where those are. Yeah. And they have warehouses of them, let me tell you. It's crazy.
It doesn't surprise me one bit. So, that's sort of your background. For me, I've just been playing games mostly, watching some things for review. I haven't been watching a ton of classic things, but when we were discussing, you know, what should we do next after we watched our Fury duology, if you wanted to call it that, I said, hey, why don't we try out the Jackie Chan movies, but very specifically Jackie Chan movies that came out before 1990 that were actually American movies. I would say most people don't know he did any movies, like specifically, not just, you know, that were released here with a dub or something, but that were actual American-funded movies for the American audience before people might say Rumble in the Bronx, but that was actually a Canada, Hong Kong production, so it was half English, half Chinese.
Yeah, I didn't know. The earliest Jackie Chan film I remember is Drunken Boxer. But that's not American. That's not American. That's
that was one of the first movies where he did a dub in English, where he dubbed himself, and he's one of the first guys that I know that did that. Where his early movies, like a lot of Chinese movies, would have a terrible dub, where they get a bunch of white dudes with smoking cigarettes in a room to voice every single character, and they had no idea how to make it sound. It always sounded terrible, or they would ham up the accent way worse than it should be. And like, I never understood, like, why wouldn't you just get, like, if it's a Hong Kong movie, why wouldn't you get a voice actor of from Hong Kong that speaks English to dub it?
Yeah, because then a lot of British expats there.
Yeah, it would sound, you know, appropriate. The accent would be right, and they would understand the context, and they probably wouldn't sound like somebody trying to record a 1940s dub of a cartoon from, like, not from Warner or from like Harvey Tunes or something.
Song of the South.
Yeah, like it's way over the top.
Yeah.
So I never understood that. Well, Jackie's the first guy that when he started speaking English, he would dub over his own stuff. So like Legend of Drunken Master was the other one. I think Super Cop became popular here. But it was right after like Super Cop and that we had Rumble in the Bronx, and that was his breakout hit because I think it was Miramax or somebody decided to take a risk on it because half of it was recorded in English. Yeah. So any of the actors that could speak English spoke English, and then Jackie would speak in I don't know if it's Cantonese or Mandarin, but he would speak in Chinese, and then he would dub over his own lines, and that was a big success. And then of course we got Rush Hour, which is where people know him. They think that was his first American movie. Well, in reality, he tried to break into the American audience in 1980 and 1985. 15 years before Rumble in the Bronx, almost 20 years before Rush Hour. And one of these I'd seen before, and the other I hadn't. So the first one was, I remember seeing it because I think I picked up a DVD from, I think it was a burnt disc, pirated DVD from Pacific Mall in Toronto, where like every single store out in the open has shelves and shelves. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but 20 years ago, everywhere on every shelf were just discs with labels written on them of whatever, and they were never American movies. Well, unless you ask nicely, then they pulled out all the American movies. And I would go with my uncle, who was from Malaysia, so he would get me a better deal. He said, "You're not going to pay the white guy price; you're paying the local price. I said, what's that? He goes, instead of paying like, I think it was $5 a disc, he goes, I can get you 6 for $20. So I would go and it was all Hong Kong movies, and they would have the usually have an English dub, or they'd have whatever. And that's where I thought the big Brawl is how I saw it. But in the US, I guess it was called Battle Creek Brawl.
Battle Creek Brawl, yeah.
I picked it up thinking that it was a Hong Kong movie, and then watching it and being like, wait, everybody's speaking English, and it's not like the dub English, it's like real English. And then, I didn't think twice about it, watched it, thought it was okay, and I'll get into it with you. But then years later, I start hearing more and more about how that was a full American movie. And it was directed by the same director of Enter the Dragon. They were trying to use this film to make Jackie Chan the next Bruce Lee after he passed away. Because they had been searching for a couple years. They tried, getting a few other actors to fill the role. And they made the biggest mistake ever at the time was Hong Kong started filming movies where they would just change the actor's name to sound like Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee with 2 eyes, Bruce Lee, Lea. Like they would all, and they even name movies after him, and it just saturated the market and made it that nobody really wanted to see another Bruce Lee. And right around this time, late 70s, we start seeing more action, more kung fu movies popping up. Some of his co-stars from Enter the Dragon had made sort of big in the blaxploitation films. Was Jim Kelly? That's his name, I think. Yeah, he was the guy with the big afro. He started making some movies. I think it was it like TNT Jackson or something, and a couple others that were pretty big in their niche markets. And then Chuck Norris comes along around 1975, 76, starts making a couple films. Right around 1978, 79, he starts making some bigger hits for, I think it was Canon Films started around that time. And they're like, oh, this Kung Fu thing is big, and we got an American guy that can do this stuff. And this is all pre-Arnold. This is pre-Stallone getting big as becoming like the biggest action stars. Because you're thinking 1979, 1980. Around this time, your biggest action stars are the emerging Chuck Norris, and I guess you could have said Steve McQueen, but he just died. So like there was nothing really in this genre, and they said, okay, well, this Jackie Chan guy, he's apparently good martial artist, we'll get him to do it. So they get the team together that made Enter the Dragon. They make this movie set in like the 1930s during Prohibition. Cast a bunch of American pro wrestlers in it. Yeah, which is hilarious. Watching it as like years later, I wasn't a wrestling fan as a kid watching this movie. Watching it now and going, I know some of these guys. Like they're literally wrestlers from the 1970s that we wouldn't necessarily know now because most of them are passed away. But they put in Judo Gene LaBelle in it. There's who else? The one that's probably most noticeable is Ox Baker. He's the guy with he had the giant, like mustache sort of, and like just hairy dude, really tall, bald head, gigantic eyebrows.
He was the guy that was the Kiss in this.
No, it wasn't the Kiss. Not the Kiss. He was the other really tall guy with giant eyebrows. Made him look like a monster. I'll send you a video. He was on The Price is Right.
Oh, he was.
He was on The Price is Right, wearing his wrestling shirt back in the day, and he's like the sweetest guy, but he was a monster, bad guy wrestler back then. Yeah. So I could see some of these guys, and I'm like, I recognize these people. They all have different names, obviously, in this. And then they had cast some other American actors. They got Jose Ferrer, and then you also had Mako, who you probably know from the Conan movies. He's the one that Arnold is with. He's in the second one. He's like the wizard.
Yeah, I do recognize him. I'm looking at a picture of him, and okay.
Yeah, he was in a lot of movies of that time period. And the co-star though, Kristen DeBelle. I don't know if you've noticed her from anything else before.
I did recognize her, and
did you recognize her because she's a porn star?
No, I did not actually.
I did.
I recognized her from Meatballs.
Okay.
That's
I've never seen Meatballs. I have to watch that.
I watched Meatballs at least a few times as a kid. That's probably a movie that's not really appropriate for my age range when I was watching it. But yeah, no, I recognized her from Meatballs. I did not know she was a porn
Okay.
star.
If you look at her film credits, Alice in Wonderland is a hardcore porno. That's the first
An X-rated musical fantasy from 1976.
Yes,
wow.
I actually watched it at my film professor's recommendation at the time, not to watch it for homework, but saying that as a representation of what the end of the adult film era was before it became what it is today, when they were still trying to make art.
Ooh, okay.
So it is a full story. People are wearing the costumes, they're playing in characters, and it just happens to have sex in it. It's hilarious because I saw that, and then I went, and I was like, when I watched that in film class, or when I was watching it as research, like it's not erotic in the sense of like you'd watch it as an actual adult film you would do today or anything, but as an art film, like to give you an idea, it cost $500,000 to make, and it made $90 million in theaters.
That's stunning. That's stunning.
Because that was why we had to talk about it in school. Was look at this was released, and it wasn't just released to the porn theaters. This is at a time when you could go to a midnight or a 1 a.m. release in any major market, and they would show an adult film for the art, aspect of it. Sure. And they might have a cut down version here or there, but it's funny because I'm like, oh, well, I wonder why this movie didn't do well. Jackie Chan's in this with a porn star. It's set in a weird time period. But we haven't even really talked about the plot. Can you remember what happens?
Okay, well, I actually kind of do. It's 1934 in Chicago, and I actually know way too much about this time period in Chicago. But Jackie Chan gets into a fight with some mobsters that were trying to shake his uncle down. It's his uncle, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And Jackie Chan is at this point not only like a guy that's helping out his uncle in the restaurant that he runs, he's also a roller derby aficionado.
Which I didn't know roller derby dated back to them. I thought it was the 50s.
It did actually, and this is one of the things that I actually knew when as soon as I watched it, it didn't faze me, and then I'm like, oh, people are going to throw a fit about that. Yeah, it started in the mid 1930s in Chicago, roller derby. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, I'll say this: the film is shot in a weird. It almost feels like a movie shot in the 60s, even though it came out in 1980. It has that sort of the muted color palette. It has the Eastman color look, not the standard Technicolor or like Fujifilm, or like it doesn't have a lot of saturation in the colors at all.
Yeah, and you're right, but the plot really doesn't pick up until about halfway through, and it's because Jackie Chan is shown that the mob that he is standing up for his uncle, and he's a pain in the butt. So they nab his brother's bride when she comes to the United States and holds her hostage effectively to make Jackie Chan fight for them in this Battle Creek brawl that's happening in Texas, because Jackie Chan is this amazing fighter. They've clearly seen it over and over and over again. So, hey, if you win this fight, your brother will get his bride back. That's the effective plot of the entire movie. Because there's lots of good fight scenes. There are lots of good fight scenes, but there isn't a lot of meaty plot to chew on in it.
Yeah, and it was clear that Jackie didn't know a word of English, maybe hello, at this point, and he was being not just fed his lines, he was having to phonetically mouth the words to get them out, because they're set at the wrong cadence and the speed, and it's very much like it sounds like when you talk to a toddler and you're teaching them a new word and getting them just to repeat the word you said.
Yeah. My only large criticism of the film is that it seemed like all the fight scenes were overly choreographed.
Yeah, apparently Jackie didn't have any input. They asked him what he could do, and then they wouldn't let him choreograph the fights. They let him choreograph some of his stunts.
Yeah, so like I buy that.
When he's parkouring around things at the beginning of the film, and like he's doing stuff in there that he never did later on in his movie career, probably because people don't realize Jackie Chan's like, he's got to be like 70 now.
Yeah.
Or maybe late 60s, early 70s. So like when he became a star here was already like 50. So this is him. This is a very young Jackie Chan who hasn't broken every bone in his body yet. So he is doing stuff that you're like, I didn't know Jackie could do, like handstands and climbing down, rafters and parkouring over walls and like effortlessly.
He was born in 1954.
Okay,
so he would 26 been, here.
Yeah, whereas where we would know him, he was 50 basically when he did Rush Hour.
Yeah,
and he was still doing all that stuff.
I don't know the exact year of Rush Hour. Was it
like 98?
98. So
yeah,
he's in his 44. Yeah, something like that.
Oh yeah,
mid 40s.
So, but still, it's like wow, he's doing all this stuff, and even though he doesn't really speak a word of English, like he's speaking English but not speaking it, what came across the screen is how charismatic he was and magnetic.
Oh, yeah, that's one thing I will always say about Jackie Chan. The man has charisma that oozes off the screen regardless.
You can tell he was still having a good time, even if he didn't necessarily understand what was happening. And you can also see why it wasn't just Golden Harvest, whoever the production company was in Hong Kong. You can see why Warner said, okay, go with that guy. Because they probably reviewed some of his footage, and then they saw he has the screen presence. He just didn't have the language. There was a barrier. So that's why they filled the film with other people, American actors, and they tried not to focus on him as much as they probably should have, because they probably were afraid that he couldn't carry the film in English.
Which is weird, because, I mean, he is the lead in this.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the story revolves around him directly.
They just didn't, you know what I mean? Like you said, it doesn't seem to get going, until... It's like they were looking for some ways to just get him into spots to do action, but then didn't really let him loose.
Yeah, and a lot of the action scenes don't feel super connected. I mean, they are, but it seems like you have like, let's say the roller derby scene, which is fantastic. There's lots of good stunts in it. There's lots of good little gags in it, but it's not really connected to anything else. It's just, okay, they're at the roller derby now.
Yeah, and what this shows to me is the magic that was Enter the Dragon was clearly, Robert Klaus has him and the Warner team had a good eye for the filmmaking of the 60s and trying to do these wide shots, but it was clear that at least half of that movie was put together by Bruce Lee. Because he got to choreograph everything. The advantage of being a native English speaker and he having not just the charisma that Jackie has, he had the drive and the ambition to tell them no. Like, he was willing to walk off the set if they didn't let him do it the way he wanted to do it. And it becomes, this phenomenon that we get. Like, we might not have had the martial art film phenomenon if it wasn't for him with that movie. So they thought, oh, we'll just get the same director to do this. We can do it here. Not realizing that a lot of that was probably the give and take from the director and the star in the previous film. It's okay. It's worth watching, I think, at least once. Yeah. I don't know if it's worth owning, unless you're a big Jackie Chan fan. I
would say I'm not a person that loves martial art movies. Now, there are martial art movies that I own, but to me, this isn't something I would own. But I'm glad I watched it. It's interesting seeing like where he started in the U.S.
Yeah, and you can see why they went.
The last ones. Yeah,
like it apparently made $20 million in theaters, but that might also be in multiple runs afterwards. Because sometimes they'll count that when it gets re-released. I have a feeling it didn't do well initially, and they just washed their hands of them. And we jump. The only thing of note too is the soundtrack was pretty good, and it was created by Layla Schifrin, who is a name you probably recognize. Did what was it? Voyage of the Damned, Dirty Harry. Did the Enter the Dragon soundtrack, obviously, because they got the same team together. Bullet,
Bullet.
Cool Hand Luke. And then of more recent stuff, let's see, the Rush Hour films. So, I mean, it's a name that they got top tier people to make the production of it. It's just, it's kind of a meh movie. It's just a historical curiosity. if anything. Weirdly, it has a 67% on Rotten Tomatoes tomato meter and an audience score of 44. I would say it's a 50% movie. It's like you'll like aspects, and then you're going to be like, meh.
Yeah, that's what I felt in the end. I was like, it's like a 5 out of 10. You know, it's not bad, but it's not great. It's forgettable in most places. There's a couple places that have really interesting scenes, but it's by far not his best work.
Yeah, it is worth watching if you're a Jackie Chan fan and you want to see his first American movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if you're a fan of wrestling and you like to see some of these old wrestlers pop up here and there, because now that I think about it, it's probably a lot easier to hire wrestlers than it was to hire stuntmen and actors that could do stunts back then.
Oh yeah, sure.
Just hire somebody back then that, even though it was, wrestling, fake, whatever, they still took their bumps and they still would fall around. They were basically the best you could get for stuntmen back then.
Yeah.
So I can see why they would have gone with them, because if Jackie hit them, they wouldn't have cared. So now we move on to which is divisive in that a lot of people don't like it, but it might be my favorite Jackie Chan movie now.
Honestly, it is my favorite Jackie Chan movie now. It honestly is.
The Protector, also known as Jackie Chan's The Protector, 1985. So he takes a 5-year break roughly from the filming of this film in 79 to 84. They decide, hey, maybe we'll give him another chance, because a few more of his films have done well on the international markets when it comes to art house theaters and grindhouse theaters. They're showing his movies at nighttime, and he's making a name for himself, and he's learning maybe just a little bit more English, because he seems to sound a little better here. So they go, okay, let's give him another chance. We're gonna pair him with Warner Brothers. Says we'll do another one. So Warner Brothers really gave him a couple chances.
Yeah,
and they make The Protector. Now this is directed by James Glickenhaus. Now, as far as directing previous films, mostly Grindhouse had made The Exterminator in 1980.
See, I've seen The Exterminator. I've seen that one.
And the movie he made right after this was Maniac Cop. Basket Case 2, Frankenhooker, McBain, which I still want to see.
I've seen Frankenhooker. I've seen McBain. Yeah. I've seen a lot of these. Yeah. Like
they're if you could think of like classic Grindhouse movies, that's kind of the stuff that this guy makes. But I'll give you the pitch here. Well, the cover is kind of misleading, because I don't think Jackie Chan uses that particular gun at all in the entire movie. It's his partner that does. But the cover is Jackie Chan holding a minigun.
It's a minigun put in quotes. Yeah.
Yeah. But here's the pitch. Jackie Chan is a New York, Chinatown police cop. That's redundant. Police officer who partners up with Danny Aiello. Yes, Danny Aiello, in a buddy cop grindhouse vulgar action movie to stop a bunch of drug smugglers in Hong Kong.
Yes. And
if that doesn't make you go, oh my God, I have to see that. I don't know what's wrong. Like, I don't know what's wrong with you at all, because that is amazing.
Glorious. It's glorious.
I had never seen Danny Aiello do anything other than like being a mobster or being like and Do the Right Thing. Like, he does like dramas, and was not, as far, I don't know his early career, but like I don't remember him doing anything pre-1990, honestly, myself. I know he was an acclaimed actor, but I've always known him as being an actor who would stand up and yell and then sit down.
Yeah.
And in here, he's like a buddy cop, high energy, high octane action star. I'm like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, and he does a really good job with it. That's the thing. Like, I don't know. What can I say about this movie besides it's enjoyable from start to end, not just because of the plot is breakneck, but because the actors do such a good job.
I'm surprised they never worked together again, because you could see, like, the chemistry there. You could genuinely see that he liked Jackie.
Oh, yeah. They got along.
You can tell when an actor is going through the motions on screen just to get the scene done. He seemed to genuinely like being and working with Jackie, even if Jackie's language skills were still very limited. So you've probably made a lot of notes. How many points did this get on your scale?
Ooh.
Hold on. Is this an Andy Sedaris territory?
Well, maybe I have to explain my nudity scale again, but
yes.
It's basically if there is a scene that has a woman topless or a man from the rear completely naked, it's 1 point. The scene will get another point if it is full nudity for a female. And there's a third bonus point if there is full male nudity.
That's the hard one to get.
But it has happened hard. Ha 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 ha. It is a very difficult one to get. Obviously, 28 days later, immediately gets 3 points because of full frontal male nudity. But that's not usually how that works. It's usually because it's in a sexual situation. This movie actually got 6 nudity points from 2 scenes. And it's not that there's male nudity in it. It's that the female nudity is so over the top and excessive for any movie of this type. Like, okay, it's an action film, so you kind of expect to see some toplessness. That's fair to say. They went full
on Grindhouse, even though it has a high budget.
It has a high budget, but there are multiple women in these 2 scenes that are fully naked, and you're watching them climb up ladders. They're sorting drugs fully nude there, and one's saying, massages.
And then they're getting into fights.
Yeah, I was shocked. Like, I was honestly shocked at the amount of it, and especially since it's a Jackie Chan film, and this isn't an Andy Sedaris film, and it's not pornography.
And so you can understand why, like, we won't get too much into it, but you can understand why Jackie was very upset with this movie for years. He didn't have any creative control, which he thought he was going to have. The studio he worked for in Hong Kong, basically, they let him do some of the action himself, but he had no say on the dialogue, the nudity content, the vulgarities, or anything. Mm-hmm. And he ended up in Hong Kong recutting the film, adding more of his action comedy scenes and re-releasing it there, where it became a better success. But for years, he wouldn't even talk about the movie in interviews.
Yeah, and it's crazy because it is, honestly, even if you take out the nudity and all that, it's a really good movie.
The problem was Jackie didn't want to make an American movie, even though the studio did, clearly. Like, it wasn't until like the 90s when he was okay with doing American style movies. Because right after this was the impetus that made him decide to direct and create the Police Story movies. Mm-hmm. Which, in a way, he said later on that he was thankful that this movie was made because it's what made him go and create his own movies, direct his own movies, and become the international superstar he wanted to be. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you could, if he hadn't done this maybe this had been more tame, it might have languished. Maybe he wouldn't have been the breakout star because maybe he wouldn't have had the drive to make the Police Story, series of 4 films that are the main series, mm-hmm. that just have those memorable scenes where, like, he's jumping down like multi-story buildings and stuff that you would never see in an American movie. So he maybe pushed harder into that. You see some of the parkouring stuff that we saw in the previous film here.
Oh, but absolutely.
Like you said, like it's so not a Jackie Chan movie, yet it is a Jackie Chan movie. So what how many points did you get on this? Like, the whole thing
for the bad movie points? Well, I mean, I should say B movie points because it technically doesn't
B movie schlock movie points.
I think I only awarded it 12 points, which does not mean that it's a bad B movie or a good B movie. It's just the excessive nudity. There's a couple really good one-liners, like, I only take my dick out when I intend to use it. Great line, yes. Cracked me up. The over-the-top action was great. So yeah, it didn't get a ton of points, but that doesn't mean that it was good or bad. It's just,
stitches in the first 10 minutes of this movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, that bar scene, where he gets into I paused at one point in it because the production was either really good or they found just the perfect actual set for it to read all the graffiti that's in the men's bathroom.
Oh,
it is amazing. There's like "Save Soviet Jews" written across the wall.
There's a bunch of stuff there.
It's really detailed.
The movie opens so different from where it ends up being. It opens in like a dystopic like landscape where there's mutant scavengers.
Yeah, it felt like Escape from New York.
Yeah, and I was positive that we saw Peter Dinklage there, but he's not in the credits, and he might have been too young. But I could swear that one of the little people roving gang members was Peter Dinklage.
I thought so too. I thought, and I think I sent that message to you. And hey, did Did you think it was Peter Dinklage?
Yeah, because it really, really, really looks like him. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not, it really does. And it was enough that I was like, I didn't know this was going to be a dystopic movie. And it's not. It's just part of that. I guess wherever they are in New York, part of that
Bronx, right?
Yeah, but it was like a hellscape. Like everything was destroyed and the buildings were falling down. And there's like a truck that's being hijacked by the roving gangs of Road Warrior.
Yeah, they're like punked out to hell and back. There's like burning tires and barrels everywhere. Yeah,
cops don't even go down there. They're the only cops that are driving down there. It's Jackie Chan and his partner who got a brand new stuffed animal for his baby.
Yeah, and I forget what guns they had right in the beginning, but they had some crazy firearms like right in the beginning.
And they decide they're gonna go for a drink, so they go to the bar, which is like the smallest bar I've ever seen. and the dialogue back and forth where Jackie's having to recite. It's weird hearing Jackie Chan say "fuck."
Yeah,
it is really weird.
It is.
It is really weird hearing him. So I can understand why he felt odd doing the movie. But the dialogue between them is like some of the best. Like it's borderline spoof, like Last Action Hero level of dialogue. But it's not intended to be. It's clear that James Glickenhaus and because he wrote the script as well as directing it, you could like to him this was supposed to be a serious movie, and all the comedy in it was supposed to be comedy, and it turns out it's even funnier because of how ridiculous it is. They're bickering back and forth, and they have the doll, and they're going to bring it inside to the whole thing is triggered by his partner bringing the doll inside, the stuffed animal inside, because he doesn't want it to get robbed out of the car. Jackie goes to the bathroom, and these crazy coked out murderous enemies that look like they should be in any Chuck Norris movie ever come out. Like they're almost like trauma films level of ridiculous, over the top maniacs. And I can't remember every line, but every line they say is a one-liner and hilarious.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I was cracking up all the way through it. I the only note that I took here was the Save Soviet Jews graffiti, because I was laughing all the way through this.
But how this all goes down is they're in the bar, the crazies, and one of the maniacs is all coked out of his mind, wants the stuffed animal. And I forget the line he says, but it cracked me up real bad. And the solution is everybody shoots everybody.
Yeah.
Jackie Chan's in the bathroom, and he shoots a guy coming after him. He shoots him with his pistol, and it lifts him like 3 feet in the air against the wall.
Yeah,
like he was shot with, like he was blasted with like
a cannon,
or like a double-barreled long shotgun.
Yeah, it was slow.
And he was already jumping. Bam! And he's wasted. I'm like, wait a minute, there's blood in a Jackie Chan movie, and it's not from Jackie Chan breaking something on himself.
There's another guy in that scene that gets shot through the front window of the bar.
Yeah.
If you remember, like he flies 30 yards or something. I mean, it's insane. He
lands in the street, not on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
But Jackie Chan's partner tries to save him, warn him. He gets shot. And then he's like, and then it starts a police chase on foot. And then we get to see the Jackie Chan doing his parkour stuff, which is pretty cool. And the guy he's chasing, when he goes through, I almost feel like when he falls through the dock, that wasn't planned.
That felt real. Yeah.
Like it looked like, they were filming, so that was probably planned. But the way he falls and it lingers on him as he tries to get up, he looked like he was struggling for real to get up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was supposed to like trip and fall, but he fell like right through.
See, I took it as this being a Jackie Chan film that they kept some of the bloopers in when they looked good.
Yeah, because it was like even though James Glickenhaus made it, it still had certain editing cuts and that done with the Hong Kong division. So he chases him onto a boat, and we get like a full-on Miami Vice chase scene.
Through New York, like through on the Hudson River, and it's insane. It's amazing.
And do you remember how he murders the bad guy?
Doesn't he? He gets the helicopter to come in.
Yep.
And like he rides the helicopter up after setting the boat that he is on a course to ram the other guy.
He's on a speedboat and crashes the boat into the other guy while getting taken away in a helicopter. And the other guy's like, "Oh shit!" and he blows up.
He just blows up. And then, obviously the police chief is apoplectic about that.
Yeah,
she's just fuming, furious. Like, you don't do this kind of crap in my precinct. Yeah.
Oh, it was great. And then, of course, he gets assigned. He's not fired because it was a good shoot, they're saying, or whatever, even though he blew a gun. He didn't even try to arrest him. They shot his partner. So, I guess it's New York, so that plays. The solution was not arrest him. It was never to catch him. It was to murder him.
Yeah.
And not murder him. Like, you can't say, "Oh, he was shooting at me and he shot back at him." The guy was out of ammo, and he races a boat and makes him explode.
Yeah. And he dies a fiery death, Judge Dredd style.
And he doesn't get fired. He doesn't even get like, they're not doing an investigation into him. They're just like, "Oh, that was too much heat, so now you got to work security." And as he walks out, we need your detective's badge or whatever, so you're going to be doing other assigned duties. So as he walks out of the police precinct, everybody does the slow clap for him for murdering that guy.
I know, I'm like, our hero, ladies and gentlemen, our hero.
Jackie. I'm like, yes! I love
murdering guys in broad daylight.
So he has to go to basically be security detail at this gala event where he meets up with Danny Aiello, who it's revealed like they've known each other. They don't really say where, but they've known each other on the force for years.
Mm-hmm.
And Danny's a troublemaker, so he's always it sounds like every once in a while he gets bumped down to do security duty because he screws up something. And usually by screwing up, it's always through some sort of police brutality.
Police brutality or like prostitution sting, something like that.
It sounds like he's been arrested. From the way he hints, he tends to go with ladies of the night more than often than not, and it's basically put a black mark on him.
Yeah.
But they appear to be work friends, and then they get while they're there, crazy explosion, action, kidnapping happens, and they both they're trying to do stuff, but they're standing there, and the look on their faces, Danny Aiello's face is, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah. They don't even hit the floor like everybody else hits the floor. They're just standing there like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, because they weren't allowed to have their guns.
Yeah, but they don't take cover. No. They're not like, we're just cops. We're the heroes. We're not going to get shot.
It shows they're used to action and shit, but they're looking around. They're just like, what? Like, because it happens so fast. Like, the look on Jackie's face is like, oh, but the look on Danny Aiello's face is, the fuck?
Yeah. I'm going to find these guys. They just ruined my nice night. Yeah.
Yeah. So then they get partnered up, and they find out it's due to there's a kidnapping involved in Hong Kong, and they're going to go back to Hong Kong because where Jackie was originally a police officer over there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to partner together, and that's how we get our buddy cops together. And I thought it was going to be more animosity between them, like Rush Hour or any of the other American buddy cop movies. No, they're straight up like best friends almost immediately.
Yeah, I mean, they have some like minor disagreements about how to handle things, but they're fine.
Occasional racist remark here or there.
Yeah, of course.
Which is par for the course, but also mid 80s exploitation film where the bad guys are supposed to be racist. So like there's more than one occasion where the bad guys, the bad Americans, call Jackie Chan a chink or other derogatory terms. Which you don't hear that so often anymore, which is, good, but also if you're an asshole racist, you're probably going to say things like that. So it makes sense that they would keep it in the movie. It's just to really, show who the bad guys are, because the little bits of racism or stereotypes that are perpetuated by Danny Aiello towards anybody in the film are meant to be more terms of endearment, even if nowadays it wouldn't be seen that way. They do that to show how racist the bad guys are.
Yes. I was going to say that like Danny Aiello, he actually has some lines that are like self-deprecating racism towards himself, like being an Italian or something like that he tries to play up on stereotypes when he's in Hong Kong. And he's doing it on purpose to try to get through this investigation, to kind of try to break through. But it comes off as being funny that he's
and nowadays it would be seen as too much, or even if it wasn't, like I think that without having the other bad guys, the white Americans, be more racist,
yeah,
it would have made him look worse. So it's really to show the contrast that, you know, he wasn't trying to be racist. It's just sort of his gruff way.
Yeah, he grew up in a different age and a different, you know, the past is a different country. Yeah.
So I figured we would mention that, because if you're somebody watching and you might be triggered, you don't like the racism aspect, you're going to see some of that in here, as with pretty much any exploitation film from the 70s and 80s.
Yes.
It's there, and it just might be surprising in that it's probably the only time you would have seen it overtly in a Jackie Chan movie.
Yes.
Like they might play it up, but they would never use words like that in his regular films. And in fact, those words are taken out in his Hong Kong cut.
Yes. That's what I've heard. I did not watch the Hong Kong cut.
I did watch it, but the Hong Kong cut does not have an English dub. So you got to trade off.
Okay, fair enough.
The trade off is you watch it in Chinese and you don't have to deal with any of that. Mm-hmm. Or you watch it in English and you got to deal with it. So that is what it is. Again, it didn't bother me watching it because it felt right in the context of the film itself.
Yes. I didn't have a problem with it. Yeah.
So they go to Hong Kong, and you can tell it was a Westerner filming Hong Kong, because I've seen a lot of Hong Kong movies, and they always film the same sort of way, the same look. This was very much a tourist look. Like, there's a lot of shots of markets and areas and buildings that I've never seen from those angles before, or shot with that sort of lighting. It's always interesting when you see a production from, you know, not used to the cultural shoot there, because nowadays when you make a movie over in China, even if you film it in Hong Kong, part of their laws will dictate that you use their crews.
Yes.
So you might have a cinematographer that's American or European, but a lot of the lighting crews and everybody else to fill up the quota will have to be done with the teams from over there. Mm-hmm. So that makes it so that everything looks basically the same nowadays, pretty much everywhere, you know, whenever you see a movie or shot in another country. Mm-hmm. It happens in Canada too. You know, 30 or 40% of your crew has to be Canadian if you're an American film wanting to film up here. Or the way around it would be to cast Canadians in leading roles. You can have a fully American crew if all the principal leads are Canadian, that sort of crap. There's all these weird laws. So I'm assuming China's the same way, because everything now looks the same there. And this was shot very differently. I was really interested to see, because in 40 years, how different, or 35 years, how different Hong Kong looks.
See, I thought while watching the Hong Kong scenes, there were 2 or 3 different looks to me that were there. Like, there's one that's kind of cyberpunkish almost, with all the neon. There's the stuff that's taking place in the markets during the day that are really kind of well lit and almost, I don't want to say nature-ish, because they're not, obviously. It's still urban, but it's all on like the water, and there's lots of bright colors, but they're not the harsh neon. And then there's like the industrial stuff that is there.
That's from the A production team. The A film crew was Glickenhaus's Warner team, and a lot of the B footage and Unit B stuff was all produced by, I think, Golden Harvest over in Hong Kong. So, under his supervision. So that's how you're going to get the different looks. So the stuff where it's all the natural lighting and where they're showing the markets, where they're emphasizing like riding down on the boats and stuff. Yeah, that was all Glickenhaus, because he was viewing it through his own lens of, I've never seen this stuff before. Whereas a local film crew would think, well, there's nothing special about this. So they'll focus on things like the neon.
Yeah, because I mean, there's that one scene when they're in the hotel room when they first get to Hong Kong, and it's just really harsh neon lighting from the sign outside, lighting Jackie Chan, and I'm like, oh, that's actually a pretty cool shot, though. I really like that.
Yeah, that was apparently the Hong Kong crew filming that. And whereas the natural stuff and the industrial stuff, like stuff that they'd be like, oh, what's the big deal? It's like, well, it's a big deal to people that don't live here. So we want to see that. It's like, if we want neon, we can go to New York, or we can go to Vegas, or we can go to, a Western city. What we don't have here are markets on boats. So while they're there, it ends up being a corruption investigation that the police are involved and yada, yada, yada. But some of the action scenes, there's a big parkour action scene that takes place amongst all the boats, which is pretty interesting. Yeah, with Jackie Chan doing stuff like pole vaulting and things. They meet up with a contact that he has there from his old days who tries to help them. And when they go to visit him again, he is burned to a crisp.
Yeah, they took him out.
And it's pretty violent. Like, some of the deaths in here are very violent.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
And at one point, like you said, there's another hotel scene or a massage parlor scene with all the nudity, which was hilarious. I'm watching it and I'm like, oh, so they're probably gonna be topless. It's an 80s movie. Oh, they're bottomless. And then
now they're all climbing up the ladder, and the camera's following them, and
they put mirrors everywhere so you can see every angle. And I'm like, oh, now I understand why Jackie said he wasn't okay with this movie.
Well, my wife came in when I was during that scene, and I'm like, oh man, you had to walk in on this. I have to explain this, but you see scenes like that in other movies when it's like drug sorting and whatnot. It's so people can't hide drug. But
what they usually do though in those movies is they're usually topless and they're wearing like a bikini bottom.
Yes, or they hide the bottom.
They hide the bottom, or they're topless and they've got these like plastic, like see-through plastic sheets on top of them. I guess to not get the drugs on them, and the bottom part will be less translucent.
Yes,
so you don't blur it out.
But yeah, this is just it's all
not here. Not here. They're stuffing drugs in melons and they're completely nude, and we're. I mean, some of the people probably didn't really need bikinis to cover up because this was the era of full bush.
Yeah,
that's the only way they could get away with it.
Well, and the one thing I will say for this movie is that the nudity was not connected with sexual violence. Does that make sense? Like, that's one of my big pet peeves.
I mean, there's violence towards them in that they were in a situation where they thought they were going to get sex.
Yes.
Or, well, not Jackie, where Danny Aiello was going to get sex.
Yes. But it wasn't like perpetrated by these.
It wasn't sexual violence against the women.
Yes.
It was the women were going to kill them by being assassins.
Yes. And so it's one of the ways I say that like Andy Sedaris generally doesn't mix sexiness and violence in that way, and that it makes it more playful. Where this was, it doesn't fit under that category. It's just that there was nudity, but it was very clearly not sexual, except in that massage scene. But it was the women perpetrating the violence.
Where they have the massage beds where they put their faces through and there's like a hole in the bottom.
Yeah.
And then it's like girls below them can do handstands and stuff. And it's like, oh, and then Danny Aiello's comments, I'm like, oh my God, it's like talking to my uncle.
Yeah, it's real vile. He says some pretty vile things. And I'm like, whoa, my God.
And I'm thinking, this is Danny Aiello. This is Mr. Serious Drama here. I'm like, he must have loved making this movie, all hamming it up like crazy.
He looked like he was having fun every scene he was in. I mean,
he was already in his 50s, and they're like, you want to be in an action movie with a martial artist? Okay.
Okay, I'll do that. Do I
probably
get to fire guns?
I'll bet you part of it was, hey, we get to film it in Hong Kong. We'll pay for your vacation.
Well, sure. Yeah, I'll do that. Give me a suitcase of money and I'll do that. Yeah.
Because I'm just looking through he was in the movie The Stuff the same year, which is hilarious. But like Once Upon a Time in America, Fort Apache, like Godfather Part 2, Moonstruck, like I'm looking. I don't think he did another action film ever. Like Hudson Hawk, he's not to do action in that himself. He'll be playing a bad guy in that. Like, and looking at everything else that he did, like that's the only action movie he ever made, and at least it was a good one.
Yeah, I loved this movie. I honestly did.
And the cover has Jackie Chan firing a minigun that looks like looks like the gun from Predator that Jesse the Body Ventura uses. But it's not what it is in the movie. In the movie, it's a rocket launcher.
Yeah, it's like a I don't know. It's not a real gun. It's described as a 6-barreled 20mm cannon,
but it fires missiles.
Yeah, somehow.
and Jackie doesn't get to fire it. Danny Aiello gets to fire the shit out of that thing, though.
Yeah.
They end up meeting up like with the friend who died over there. He had an American, I guess, Vietnam vet that stayed somehow there. He talks about Nam, but it's like you're in Hong Kong, so I guess he just stayed in the Orient.
Yeah, he stayed in Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So he ends up becoming like their third partner. So I guess how they were trying to market this is as an action movie. It's like with an Asian, an African American, and a white Italian as like this action trio. And so they end up going on a rampage to get the girl back for this kidnapped, also stop the drug trade by blowing it up, and they have a big shootout at these docks. And Jackie has a big fight with a guy who I believe was a big martial artist as well. Let me see here. What is his name? There's also some pro wrestlers.
Roy Chow is Mr. Ko?
No, it was the
he's been in a lot of martial arts movies.
No, it was the white guy. That was the racist white guy.
Oh.
Let me see. What's his name here?
I don't recall offhand.
Bill Wallace.
Bill Wallace.
Yeah, he's what does it say here? Karate. He acted. He was in Force of One with Chuck Norris. He was a play-by-play commentator for the UFC.
Okay.
What does it say here? Something about him. Oh, he's kickboxing champion. So, he was a karate and kickboxing champion, wrestling in the Air Force, full contact karate. It's basically Chuck Norris without being Chuck Norris. Mm-hmm. So that was, I guess, what they wanted to have a big showdown. And there's a pretty cool fight with those two guys together. And then we get the shootout scene at the end, and happy-go-lucky, everybody's back in America happy. Jackie Chan picks up his ex-partner's kid, raises him onto his like shoulders, and they walk away all happy. And it's like, what? There could have been more. They could have made more movies.
they could have, because the chemistry between Jackie Chan and Danny Aiello is fantastic in this. The action scenes were really well shot. Just the style of the filmmaking was great.
I can see myself watching this with friends multiple times.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. When I go up to see my friend up north in a few weeks, I'm gonna bring this to show her. And
I know your wife hasn't seen all of it, but she should watch it with you.
Yeah, she should. She walked in at the most inopportune time, where you
Honey,
hate that when you have to.
Honey, it's not porn.
It's not porn. Yeah, I swear.
It's not porn. I'm watching it to record something with Alex.
Well, as soon as I started explaining, she's like, "Oh, okay, I get it. It's a 1980s film, right? And it's not Andy Sedaris."
It's like it could have been like when you could have been just turned and said it's one of the 80s movies for Alex and Mike. And that would have been, oh, okay.
Then why are you enjoying it so much, Aaron? No, that's not.
Because there was an Avenging Angel.
Oh man, I still say the first Angel movie is fantastic, along with the
first
second
Angel.
one.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking the second opening for Avenging Angel, when it's just like for no reason, the undercover detective is completely naked, showering, getting ready, and they just keep focusing on her boobs.
Yeah.
And I think you said your wife walked in, and she's like, "What are you watching?"
What is this?
It's not a porno. It's just the 80s, honey.
I can tell it's the 80s.
But yeah, like this is probably not the Jackie Chan film to watch with your kids.
No.
Even the Hong Kong cut, probably not. It's just not. It won't bore the kids to tears like the previous film would, but this is probably not the movie you want to watch with your kids until they're over a certain age, or if you've got a relationship where you can watch these kind of movies together.
Because
you will be surprised if you like your 15-year-old or 14-year-old or even 10-year-old, if you're going to watch a movie and you're like, oh, we're going to put on Rumble in the Bronx, and then we're going to put on another American movie he made. And you'd be very, very surprised.
Yes. Because, I mean, it does seemingly come out of nowhere. Like, that one scene with all the full nudity.
Yeah, it's one of his only R-rated movies, like, real hard R-rated movies.
Yeah, it is. And, I mean, understandably, understand that I love this movie. I will say that again and again and again. It is really good. I do recommend it.
And it is on Blu-ray, so if you wanted to pick it up, you can totally pick it up.
Yes. do so, please. If you're a Jackie Chan film, you've never seen this, even if you are a fan.
Or if you're a big fan and you haven't watched it or haven't given it, time of day because you just listen to Jackie himself, he's got really strong moral convictions that he opposed the tone and some of the content of the film. And for that, you can respect him.
Oh, yeah.
But the film itself is not, like, it's got a 20% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics from back in the day. It's just I just don't think it's been updated since, because it's become a cult classic now.
Yeah, and see, I said for Battle Creek Brawl, like 5 out of 10. To me, this is like an 8 out of 10.
This is an 8 or 8.5 out of 10 for me, easily. Yeah. Like to me, a good 1-2 punch, even though this is a little more R-rated. If you wanted to, from the last show and this one, if you put Blind Fury and this together as a double movie night with your friends,
oh, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, you start out with the little bit easier stuff. Start out with Blind Fury, and then put the kids to bed.
Yeah,
and you could have a really good time with this. Like this is my favorite era of the action exploitation film, 1984 to 1991. That group, it seems to be like where it hit the right spot, and then I think it all went to shit when the home video market took over, when tapes became cheaper.
Yeah, see, I agree, because in this period, the filmmakers are really trying to push into areas that they never have before, or push beyond a boundary to do something new and shocking or interesting.
Yeah, which they did do on home video releases for direct-to-video back in the 90s when they still had a budget, but the budget went down.
Mm-hmm.
Like even like the direct-to-video market now is garbage. 99% of it, 99% has been garbage since like Steven Seagal started making those movies in like 2003. It's right around the time that like the DVD market got saturated. It went way down, especially when Netflix and everything came out. Like the last 15 years, very much so. But in the early 90s, you had a few companies that were putting out high-quality video releases. I'm saying that in quotes, high quality compared to now. But they were still a jump down because they started filming for full screen intent, meaning they were getting less on the screen. A lot of these filmmakers went from having this might have had like a $7 or $8 million budget. They went down to having like $2 million to make a movie. Mm-hmm. Or you had just less creative freedom in how they could get some of these better actors, because there are actors that in their contracts, like they might state, this movie must be released in theaters for my client to work on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you had a whole generation of people where, until the big resurgence of direct-to-video movies, I'm saying that in quotes again, for Netflix, Amazon Prime, where they're starting to pay like $150 friggin' million to make movies now, mm-hmm. just to put them on streaming platforms. And now we're getting AAA actors and like real, like think about The Irishman, a Martin Scorsese 4-hour movie was on $230 million budget on Netflix only. Like that is insane. If that was not something we could ever have thought of, there's no way you would have ever have gotten at that time period Jackie Chan to do a movie if they would have said, oh, it's only going to go directly to video. So this is that era where you can get these really creative things where the technology for special effects had started to get better.
Mm-hmm.
The stunt work had gotten better, but they didn't have the shackles of the direct-to-video market yet, saturating things.
They were still producing it for theaters.
And they would do what they called four-walling, where if this was released by Warner and it only made like under $100,000 or under $1 million, which now it's made a ton more on video. But back in the day, somebody like Canon Films would make a movie with Sho Kosugi. They'd make like a ninja movie, or they'd make another one of their Chuck Norris, because they made like 15 Chuck Norris movies. And when they would go to a town, they'd go to the theater and they would pay the theater what they call four-walling, where they would rent they'd rent the screen. So unlike the theater chains, which do it now, where they show the movie for roughly, they get the ticket sales, or the movie theater gets the ticket sales, and they're all sort of vying to get things. Back in the day, the production company would rent the screen to show, and then reap in all of the ticket sales.
Mm-hmm.
So Disney's the only one that does that now. Disney, that's why if you ever get a movie pass, let's say you had a bad experience at a movie, for whatever reason, and the theater comps you with a movie ticket, you'll look at it and it will say on the bottom, not valid for Disney films. The only way that works is if you go to a Disney movie and have a problem, they give you a separate one. And that's because Disney purchases the screen for the time period they're showing it there. So they get a different percentage of the money sales. So it's a lot of back-end stuff. But back then, the way these independent films worked is they would rent the theaters out. So that's why a movie like this, even though it might have not made a lot, or let's say we found one that made a bunch, like a Chuck Norris movie, you'd be like, well, I didn't see it in my theater or anything. Well, it's because whatever theater they were running it in, they paid to run it there for like 9 weeks, or they paid for like 3 months of that screen. Whereas now it's all based on how many people actually show up.
Sure.
So it's very interesting how different the industry changed, and it's because now there's like 2 or 1 theater chains in the States that are like nationwide.
Yeah, and I can say that with Darlene and my podcast with the 50s and 60s, it's even different then, because back in the day the studios owned theater chains.
Yeah.
So they could just put whatever they wanted in as long as they could get butts and seats. That's why you'd have your A movies and B movies.
Yeah, we don't have that just the same way right now. Cineplex is the nationwide one, and they were going to be bought by Regal Cinemas, which is in the UK, but Regal's tried pulling out. Now they're countersuing. Basically, Cineplex lied about their finances, and it came out that they lied about it in disclosure. So this multi-billion-dollar takeover might not happen, and it might cripple the entire industry here. Our second biggest is Landmark, which owns maybe like 20% of the theaters that the other one owns. And they're a private company out of Alberta, I think. And they've been running pretty well. Like, they were my preferred cinema to go to. They still did Cheap Tuesdays, better seats. Like at Cineplex, I know our money's a little different. Like, so take off 30%, but at Cineplex, you were looking at about $12 to $15 for a ticket. So you go in, and if you wanted to get a popcorn combo, a large popcorn, large drink, it's $19. And you're like, what the hell? Or over $23 if you want one that has like a snack with it, like a thing of M&Ms or something. If you went to Landmark, take off about $5 from each of those. And yet they showed the same movies. And Landmark is where they had the IMAX screen here. So that was good. But like the industry, you've got those two companies, and then you have like a couple independents here that I like to go to, preferred to go to, because you pay the same price for the movie ticket, or maybe $10, and then you pay like $8 for a large popcorn and drink that's refillable. So like the industry is so strangled by having only two big companies run everything. And the scary thought is, if they start to fail, it might mean that Rogers or Bell, the telecommunication companies, will buy them. And if that happens, that means that they own everything, because they already own the television stations. They own all the radio stations in Canada. They own the movie studios. They own the TV production studios. They own all the TV channels. They own the cable and the satellite providers and the fiber lines. The only thing that they don't currently own is the movie theaters. So if that happens, so our industry is in dire straits, as I imagine. I've heard AMC's having trouble in the States, and that's your big one, right?
Yeah. AMC, NCG is another one.
And I know that there's other ones that are like certain geographical areas where they have a big chain.
Yeah, like in my area, we have Celebration Cinema is one of the smaller ones.
Yeah, we used to have, like, when I was a little kid, like 4 or 5 different chains, and then it became Famous Players and Cineplex. And then Cineplex bought Famous Players, and they were forced under the Monopoly Act to sell part of it, and that's how that other company, Landmark, started. But they're only in the larger markets. So if you live in a small town or a smaller area, you basically have to go to a Cineplex. And if they die, there's no cinema in Canada.
Oh, man. That's good.
So
yeah.
It's going to be, so it's, I always like going to see these films, because I'll sort of swing it back to this, is how it works here is with the CanCon content, or Canadian content, they have to show a certain amount of Canadian films per year in the cinemas, even if they're going to lose money having them there. It's the law. So you'll see things that are like David Cronenberg movies. When they do come out, they'll go to theaters because he's a known name here. But you'll see something like, if a Canadian director made this, or for instance, Hobo with a Shotgun, which was made It was made as a spoof originally, as a fake trailer for the Grindhouse movies from Robert Rodriguez and Tarantino.
Yes.
It won the contest for the Canadian contest, at least for the fake trailer award. They showed it before the movie started here as a fake trailer, and I think parts of the Northeast in the States. And then he got Telefilm Canada to fund an actual movie. They hired Rutger Hauer. It was Rutger Hauer's like last big good guy role. They cast, I think, the Trailer Park Boys in it as extras.
Yes. That's how I found out about it, and then I ended up buying it because of that.
Yeah. So I mean, like the whole thing was filmed out east. Well, that didn't go to Cineplex because Cineplex was showing some other CanCon content at that time, but Landmark got it. And so between the two theaters, how you see a lot of these Grindhouse movies is that they are forced to show them here. I don't know if it's like that in the States. If you probably not, you wouldn't have your own version of American content because everything's American content.
Yeah,
but like there isn't like an indie film incentive down there to force it, so you kind of have to seek out like art house theaters to see things.
Yeah, and there's certain of the big chain theaters that will have.
They'll have like a tiny screen, like one small screen that shows off. Like
or you really have to look for it. Like I had to drive from Lansing to Grand Rapids to see Leningrad when it was released, and because it was a foreign film.
Yeah, see, like here I have the Apollo Cinema, which is it's a single screen, but they use a projector from Christie Digital, which is actually a company here that builds cinema projectors. Well, they show documentaries. They show second run, so like as soon as it leaves, let's say like Jurassic Park comes out, and then like a week after it's out of regular theaters, they get it. Mm-hmm. And they'll show that. And the rest of the time, what they're showing are Canadian independent cinema, action movies, Grindhouse, documentaries. I saw a documentary there on like the Wrecking Crew, the team that recorded all the background tracks for like the Beatles and Beach Boys and everybody else.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So fun stuff like that. This is the kind of movie, The Protector, that you'd see at one of these theaters. Or if you went to a midnight screening where it's like $2 or $3 for a couple movies in a row. And I kind of miss that they don't make movies like this anymore. They try to, but they always look so cheap or sound so cheap. Yeah. This looked like a professional, high quality movie.
Yeah, that's what I took it as. I mean, even though it had some schlocky elements to it, some over the top elements that I do associate with Grindhouse, it was, the production quality was so high that
it's almost shocking. It's like what am I watching? Because it's not a spoof movie, but it's the kind of movie that you think like a Lethal Weapon, or Loaded Weapon would be like, or something. But it's not. It's not.
It's serious. Mm-hmm.
It's a serious movie that you can laugh like crazy at, and it was intended to be funny, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's all I can really say on this. It's just I can't recommend it enough, and I don't think very many people have seen it at all.
Yeah, I recommend it, obviously, and it's mainly because it is fantastic, but you probably haven't seen it.
Yeah, just don't watch it with your kids. So that's going to do it. I don't know what we're going to watch next. We've got a few things percolating, but
I've made some suggestions.
Yes, and I'll be making sure that I track them down. I'll try to get a couple pairings together that would sort of make sense, or something maybe that's so contrastingly different that would be interesting. But that's going to do it for us here at This Week in Geek. I have been Alex along with Aaron, and we're going to say, I guess, good night, goodbye, and make sure you watch The Protector.
Yes. Have a good night, folks.
At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Geek. Hungry for more? Check out our website at thisweekingeek.net. You can subscribe to the podcast, browse our Twitter and Instagram, and leave your thoughts on today's topics. If you'd like to give us some feedback, send us an email at feedback@thisweekingeek.net. Tune in next time, and remember,
lower your shields and surrender your listenership.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.